back to another one of our online lectures here in world history. We have finally reached part 4 of our Consequences of Imperialism lecture. In part 1, we looked at the unrest in the Balkans, which led to World War I. In part 2 and 3, we looked at Darfur and Rwanda. And here in part 4, we're going to look at Gandhi and the independence movement in India. So we're going to come back to our constructive response questions and focus on question number 3. Question number 3 says, describe who was Mahatma Gandhi and what actions he took in India. So we want to know a little bit of his background, and certainly we want to know what specifically he did in India that's going to help lead to an independence movement for the Indians. So what are we going to learn? Like I said, it's just a little recap. We've already talked about the unrest of the Balkans, which led to World War I. We've already talked about the genocide in Rwanda, and we've also talked about the genocide in Darfur. And today we're going to focus on Gandhi and the independence movement in India. Gandhi uses civil disobedience in India. Well, over 1 million Indians enlisted in the British Army during World War I. And that's significant because by doing so, they thought that this was going to help their situation. They were promised reforms that would eventually lead to self-government, but when they returned home from war, they were treated as second-class citizens again, and this led to acts of violence. So a lot of these Indian men enlisted thinking that they were helping India, that they were doing something noble, not only fighting in the war, but ultimately we're going to help India gain control back of India. But clearly it didn't happen that way. So it only solidifies the resentment, hatred, and anger that the Indians have towards the British rule in India. So the British decide that they're going to pass the Rowlatt Acts. And the Rowlatt Acts allowed them to imprison dissenters without a trial for up to 2 years. You can imagine, people who fight back against the British now can be thrown in jail, and the key can essentially be thrown away for 2 years. So what that's going to do is that's going to really restrict the way the Indians can rebel or fight back. So you're really hamstringing them in a lot of different ways. Not only do they not have control of their government, but now they can't complain about it. Now they can't stand up and fight about it. So that's really, really hurting the Indian freedoms that they wish that they had. Well, something big happens in this particular event. 10,000 Hindus and Muslims flocked to the city of Amritsar to protest the Rowlatt Acts. The British Army shows up and opens fire on this peaceful crowd. 400 Indians are killed and 1,200 are wounded. This becomes known as the Amritsar Massacre. So you're looking at different events that help really anger the Indian people even more. And when there's bloodshed of this degree, it's certainly going to call more and more people to try to act and certainly fight back against the British. So the Amritsar Massacre is one of those things that should have never happened. The orders were given to fire on a peaceful crowd, and 400 were killed in the process. Now, if you want to see this, you can go ahead and click on this link. There's a film, an Academy Award-winning film called Gandhi that was made in the 1980s, and they show the Amritsar Massacre in pretty good detail in that film. The clip is on YouTube, so you can use this link to get there, or if you want to click below, I'll have the link listed there. You can simply click on that and it'll take you right to this clip on YouTube. So you can go ahead and do that now if you want to see the Amritsar Massacre. Well, certainly with the Rowlatt Acts, with the imperialism going on in India, even going back to the Sepoy Mutiny, people like Gandhi would have been very much influenced by freedom. They would have wanted to fight back and take their country back for their people. So Mahatma Gandhi encouraged the Indian National Congress to follow a policy of non-cooperation with the British by use of civil disobedience. Basically said, hey, if we fight back, we can get thrown in jail. If we fight back, we can get killed. We have to try a different avenue. So civil disobedience became the new form of protest here in India. Well, this is one of our vocab words for the unit. Civil disobedience is the deliberate and public refusal to obey an unjust law through the use of nonviolence. So you pick a law that you think is unjust and you fight back without actually fighting. Because as we found out in history, anytime there's a protest, if you start throwing rocks, if you start throwing punches, you can get thrown in jail. You're essentially breaking the law. And so you can be arrested. But if you find ways to disobey that law peacefully and nonviolently, then it becomes very much more difficult for the authority to actually shut you up or throw you in prison. So this civil disobedience is going to be very much pioneered by Gandhi here, and certainly adopted by Martin Luther King Jr. during the civil rights movement here in the United States. So Gandhi's going to do a lot of different nonviolent protests. He's going to organize boycotts of British goods. He's going to organize boycotts of government schools. And he's going to tell the people to refuse to pay British taxes. After all, I mean, money talks. So it's an economic form of protest here. So those are some of the tactics that Gandhi uses. Gandhi encourages Indians to weave their own cloth and not buy Indian cloth. We had talked about earlier on in this unit how the British forced the Indians to produce all these goods and also buy goods from the British. Well, now Gandhi's basically saying, hey, well, let's not do that. Let's make our own cloth so that our money stays in our country and we're not giving our money to the British. So this was a pretty big deal to encourage people to weave their own cloth. Now, Gandhi really wanted people to be nonviolent, but it didn't always work. Some demonstrations often turned to riots despite Gandhi's pleas. And of course, thousands of Indians were arrested for strikes in these demonstrations. Gandhi himself even went to jail several times. But one of the more famous protests and acts of civil disobedience that Gandhi organizes is something called the Salt March. So Gandhi organized the Salt March. Basically, he and several hundred other Indians would march 240 miles to the coast to collect seawater, where they would let it evaporate, and then they would collect the salt to avoid paying government taxes on salt. And salt was a very important spice, not only for taste, but salt is used to preserve meat and other things like that. So salt, if you had a tax on salt and you didn't want to pay taxes to the British, you had to come up with your own salt. And so this became the way to do it here for Gandhi and the Indians. So a 240-mile march to the coast to collect seawater, let it evaporate, and then collect the salt, all in the name of avoiding paying taxes to the British. Another march that he organized was to a salt processing site, which saw the British attack many peaceful demonstrators with steel-tipped clubs. 60,000 protesters were arrested, including Gandhi, and this demonstration was carried in all the newspapers across the globe. Even though this particular demonstration ended up in the arrests of many people, including Gandhi, when you can get your cause, when you can get your actions in the newspaper to be seen by more people than just the people in your country, that can be a huge win for your protest, because it's going to create sympathy. It's going to get people to believe in your cause, to see you as the underdog and root for you. So even though this demonstration was put down, the fact that it was carried in the newspapers is a huge win for Gandhi. In 1935, the British Parliament passed the Government of India Act, which provided local self-government and limited democratic elections. So we're starting to see the system work. We're starting to see change in the British-controlled India, where they're starting to give control of India back to the Indians. And that's what they get with local self-government and limited democratic elections. That's a step in the right direction. So Gandhi's efforts organizing the people with these boycotts and these marches is definitely having the effect that he wants on the people. Got one more clip here from the film Gandhi if you want to check it out. It is Gandhi organizing the Salt March. It's about 5 minutes long. It's a really pretty good, it's actually a montage of a couple of scenes from the film that will certainly help you out. So you can either use the link here or you can click on the link that I have listed here below. And that should take you right to this scene from the film Gandhi. So you can go ahead and check that out. Here's an image of the Salt March, just a peaceful protest with Gandhi leading the way. And of course, Gandhi's efforts eventually lead to India's independence. So you see here a newspaper article from 1947. Now, these things don't happen overnight. So in 1947, the British do leave India, and India gets its freedom. So birth of India's freedom. But of course, sadly, this has to come at the expense of Gandhi. Gandhi is shot and killed. And he is assassinated before India gets its freedom. But his inspiration, his marches, his boycotts inspired so many people to help kick the British out of India. So Gandhi really is a very, very important figure in the 20th century. But not only that, he is a man who shows that you can stand up to imperialism. And he stood up to the British and got the British out of India. So that's going to bring us to the end of our entire lecture here on all four of our stories. So our result is the tragic events in Rwanda, Darfur, India, and Europe with World War I prove that imperialism can really have catastrophic results. So we use those four stories as our consequences of imperialism to really show that imperialism can cause some major world events. I think we've covered that quite well. So, okay, let's finish up this four-part series on the consequences of imperialism by looking at our last question. The last question says, describe who was Mahatma Gandhi and what actions he took in India. Obviously, we want to know a little bit about him, more so his beliefs in civil disobedience. Gandhi definitely wanted to remove the British presence from India. He did not believe in doing so violently. So civil disobedience, really refusing to obey laws that you see as unjust, really willing to challenge the system without resorting to violence or real blatant breaking of laws. I think that's really important to understand what civil disobedience is, because he inspires Martin Luther King, who would use civil disobedience not much more than a decade later here in America. So knowing that about Gandhi is really important. Some of the actions he took in India, certainly protests. He encouraged the people to weave their own cloth rather than buying British cloth that the British would profit off of. The Salt March was a really big one, organizing this 200 plus mile march to the sea to collect salt water and turn that into salt, because there was a high tax on salt. Of course, the British would benefit from that. We could also throw in there the Amritsar Massacre. Now, that's not exactly something Gandhi did, but it's important to understand it did lead to Gandhi taking action in India. So that might be a little bit that we could use to answer the who was Gandhi piece, because I think seeing those things, the death of these hundreds of people that should not have ever been fired upon, is going to call somebody like Gandhi to take action in India. So that gives us a pretty good recap. Certainly Gandhi has a sad ending. We know that he was shot and killed, but India would achieve its independence shortly after that, and his efforts were very, very critical in making that happen. So that's going to do it for us here. We definitely looked at a lot in this story. We broke it down into 4 pieces. So I hope you learned something, and we'll see you next time.